as a very young child, um, I don't think I was considered the brightest spark in the box. Sat on a special table, knew I was different, not like others. And I lost my mother very early. I was 6, and then my father when I was 8. And so I sort of went through school feeling very different, not like other people, and certainly not talking about my feelings, and certainly feeling a lot of anxiety and stress through those years. High school, I managed to keep my head down, avoid confrontation, avoid showing my feelings, talking about how I felt to anybody. But I got through my high school. It was a different setup then. And then I went off to another school, and just had this constant, well, it certainly was anxiety. I lived with sort of lots of families to begin with, and then a family who I guess can only be described as dysfunctional. And I was removed from there when I was 15 and went to live with some foster parents in London. And I would have said to you, I survived school. Any situation that was remotely stressful, I would send me into a tailspin, but I couldn't talk about it. I didn't know who to talk about it. I didn't trust anybody. And so I left school with the very basics of exams. Certainly didn't consider myself to be bright under any circumstances, and felt very different. I remember my friends would cry when leaving school. And I used to think, oh, I'd like to join in this crowd and show my emotions, show that I could cry when I was leaving school too. And of course the tears wouldn't come. I was so good at hiding how I was feeling. And I got engaged at 16, 15, married at 18. I didn't think that anyone could be attracted to me. There's a song by, I think, Janice Ian called The Pains of 17. I remember totally relating to that. So that was kind of me, very young, early life at school, a non-achiever, surviving school. As I say, I got married early. I had my daughter at 23, my son at 24. And my son has Asperger's syndrome and has been one of my greatest teachers. He's an amazing lad. My marriage was slightly dysfunctional. That's probably an understatement, and I won't go into all the reasons for that. So we split up when I was maybe 33-ish. And at 33, somebody said to me, I used to talk about the arts the whole time. I was fascinated by painting, ceramics, loved the arts, loved to be around them. My father was a painter. But in my early life, one of the people that I was living with made a comment, and they said, "You're not a painter. I won a prize for art." And she said, "You're not a painter. Your father was a painter." And that comment stayed with me. And I wore it like an overcoat, like, oh, this is me. I'm not a painter. My father was a painter. And I remember going to an art class at school and I used to shake because it meant so much to me. And I kind of wanted to be a painter because my father was one. But then I heard that I wasn't, and I believed it. And not everything that people say to you is true. And not everything you think about yourself is true. But at that time, I believed that to be the truth. So I took myself off at the age of 33 and took an A-level in pottery. And I had to write a couple of essays while I was there. And somebody said to me, "You know what? You're quite a bright spark, aren't you?" Well, I don't think anyone had ever said that to me. And I certainly didn't think I was. And I've always had a thirst for learning, but didn't do it until this time. And then the lecturer said, Terry, maybe you'd like to take something called a BTEC, which had just come out at that time, which I took, and I passed, I got this distinction. And then I had a year out, sort of supporting my children, single parent. And then I moved to Leicestershire to take a degree in ceramics, and had a lot of fuss made of me. And somehow I came out, I went to Loughborough College of Art. I came out with a first, who'd have thought, and became an art therapist, and was absolutely fascinated, and always have been fascinated, by the way people think and what makes people do the things they do. Whilst I was doing the art therapy, and I worked with people in hospitals and in colleges and was sort of peripatetic, I remember looking at one of my clients, and he did have incredibly special needs. And my one thought was, you've got special needs. And then I thought, actually, my son has very special needs. And then I thought, I have special needs. And then I started thinking about sort of a wider group of, actually, we've all got special needs. We all have special needs. That one thought took me into the world of education. I had to go back to college to get a maths GCSE, which I didn't have. And then my first job was as a teacher, was in a community college in Leicestershire. Well, I just thought I'd come home, because I was with teenagers who I have a real affinity with. And I remember looking around the walls in the community college of the artwork, and there were vases of flowers, pop stars, self-portraits. But I just thought, what does this tell me? It's a pretty tough place. And I thought, what does it tell me about any of the students that are here? And so I wrote something at that time. I felt so passionate that kids should have a voice, especially teenagers, that I wrote something called The Identity Project. And I took a master's in it. So it was something like adolescent development and its relationship to art and design education. I think had a long title. But basically there were 3 questions. How do you see yourself? How would you like to be seen? And how do you think other people see you? Now, I had none of this understanding, the stuff that I've gone on to learn, but those questions felt quite important to me. And I'm sure I was asking them to myself as much as I was to the students. And I've just printed off a couple of things before I came online. And what was fascinating, these were young A-level students who would tell me that they weren't particularly aspirational, or they were telling me that they had nothing to offer, and who would listen to them anyway. And so with these 3 questions, they started to produce pieces of A-level artwork. Some of them had never worked in 3 dimensions or in colour. But I've got one student work here. So this, I don't know what you can see from there, but this is a papier-mâché box of chocolates. And on the selection here, you'll see there's a chocolate that's had a bite taken out of it. And she said, oh, that's the part of me that nobody likes. And they've taken a bite of, they've sort of seen me and they've put it down, they don't like it. There were students doing things like this. They were seeing themselves still, they wanted to be children, but they had to be seen as adults. And there was this sort of fight, adolescent fight going on for this control in their head. Were they still children? Were they still adults? Along with all the exam and the pressures that the exams that come with that. This girl, she did an incredible bag, which was nearly as tall as me. And there's a compass on here, and it says sort of nowhere, everywhere, somewhere, wherever. And there's a little piece here of netting that only some people could see through if they looked very carefully. And it was all about sort of how they hid their feelings. There's There's several images here. I won't go through them all. And it really struck me how much these students needed to have a voice. And I said, well, where do you get the opportunity to have a voice within school? And they said, well, we don't. You know, we have a tutor time, and if you get a nice tutor, they might pay some lip service, but we don't. But this was back in 95, so I'm talking a long time ago. I'm not suggesting that the system is like this now, but I'm saying that's how it certainly was. But instead of, what I noticed was that instead of producing a final A-level piece, having looked at the art history and producing a piece with all the experiments that go with it, students were producing 7, 8, 9, 10 final pieces. So what hit me was that as their thinking was changing, their images were changing. And that was so powerful. And not only were the images changing, these students started to write incredible poetry. They kept journals way, way over and above what you would expect someone doing for an exam. And then I got visits from students who weren't taking art, saying, look, we're not doing your subject, but we want to do your project. And so I was there, and sometimes until 9 o'clock at night, working with teenagers who desperately wanted to have a voice and talk about either exam stress or how life was for them, or their thoughts, their beliefs, their values, their parents' values. Should they own them? Should they not own them? It was fascinating.